Welcome back to a Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. During a recent speech, former President Obama said that the old guard of politics need to step back and let the younger people take over. And I'm 100% with him on that one. In a recent speech, he said, "My bet is that all the problems we have right now will be solved if old folks get out of the way and we turn the reins over to the next generation that is coming up so that they can bring those good old-fashioned American values to new sets of problems." It seems like a pretty simple idea and to some a pretty obvious one, but it's become abundantly clear in the last decade of politics that having politicians cling to power well into their geriatric years has been something that has been to our national detriment. Old politicians cling to old mindsets and old ideas and try to apply them to modern situations, and they really don't work. It's hard to see how old people who can probably not even program a VCR can legislate properly on topics about modern technology and AI, or craft solid economic policy based on the economy as it is now, when they still remember going to the store and buying something for a nickel. While it is undeniable that age brings experience, and having spent decades in politics, they have definitely accrued a lot of experience and a lot of political knowledge, but it also leaves them a very stagnant mindset. They know, well, this is how it's always worked while I've been here in this position, so this is what I will always push for. The political world, or really the world in general, changes around them, but they refuse to change with it. They want to just stay stuck where they are, both metaphorically and literally, and simply remain the same forever. And as a nation, it needs to constantly adapt and progress. We can't have it largely led by people who were in college when we landed on the moon. And I suppose, to some degree, I can understand the reticence to leave their positions. As a senator or a congressman, they make $174,000 a year and are able to make incredibly lucrative stock picks. They can live an incredibly comfortable life, so the idea of giving it up, especially as they age into their later years, probably doesn't seem appealing in the least. And I think aside from the financial benefit, they would be giving up a sense of status. After years and years and decades in their office, I feel like they end up with a sense of ownership over that office. A sort of, I've been here so long, I know how this works. I don't want some unknown coming in thinking that they can do the job that I do better than I've been doing. Sometimes it feels like our politicians forget that they don't have lifetime appointments, because they certainly act like they do. But while I certainly think that a lot of why we have a government composed entirely of people who could have seen the Beatles on Ed Sullivan live on their family's black and white TV are because those old politicians refuse to give up their seats to younger ones. It's also very important to note that those aged politicians don't elect themselves. An equally aged population of voters are the ones who keep electing them to those fourth and fifth terms in Congress and Senate, and oftentimes even the presidency. Older voters like to vote for people that they know, people they recognize, oftentimes people that they've seen in their current political roles and want them to keep going because that's the person that they are familiar with and they crave familiarity. While a rejection of change and clinging to the known is usually something associated with the political right, it is something that is shared by both sides of the political aisle. Democrats like Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi didn't remain in their positions for as long as they have because young voters like them so much and want to keep them in their positions. It's because old Democrat voters, when presented the opportunity to elect someone younger or new, always default on the old person that they knew back in the past and want to keep in their role because they don't want to rock the political boat. They don't want to risk anything becoming too changed. They know these people. They know how they govern. They like how they do things. So they want them to just stay on indefinitely. In retrospect, it almost seems miraculous that we ended up with a young senator from Illinois as a Democratic nominee for president back in 2008 instead of the seasoned, well-known Hillary Clinton. I still remember just how all you'd ever hear was, oh, he's too young, he doesn't have the experience. Hillary Clinton is clearly the superior choice. She's established in the Democratic party. She's an experienced senator. We want someone like that. We don't want some young, untested guy like this Barack guy. And it's easy to forget just how close we came to having a Hillary Clinton versus John McCain battle in 2008 for the presidency. When it came to the popular vote, Hillary Clinton won by over 10,000 votes. And sure, I don't have the evidence to say, oh, those were mostly older Democrat voters voting for her. But I'd be willing to bet that they were, because they said, yeah, we know Hillary Clinton. We like Hillary Clinton. We want her to go up against McCain and maybe win the presidency. We don't know who this Barack Obama guy is. He's too young and inexperienced. He's not qualified to be running as our candidate. Not yet. Part of why I'm pretty confident that that was the attitude back in those days is because that was exactly what I would hear 8 years later when it was a matter of picking the nominee to go up against Donald Trump in 2016. All I'd hear was just how much love and trust they had for Hillary Clinton, though at this point it wasn't a question of age and experience because she wasn't going up against a young, untested candidate. She was going up against Bernie Sanders, someone who was actually older and also very experienced and established in politics. But when it came to a Hillary versus Bernie battle, it was less about which one do they know and are familiar with more? Though it was still that. They knew Hillary Clinton. They loved her. They thought that she had been around long enough. She deserved the nomination. She deserved the presidency. But 2016 was less about loving the candidate and more about loving the form of government. A lot of older Dems felt uncomfortable at the idea of a socialist Bernie Sanders getting the nomination. They liked Hillary Clinton and her traditional capitalism. She didn't rock the boat too much. They don't want to rock the boat. They want consistency. And Hillary Clinton promised consistency while Bernie Sanders was going to upend the system and change things. And the idea of that kind of change, that radical change, made them uncomfortable and they just couldn't go with it. Even now, nearly a decade later, people still wonder, could Bernie Sanders have beaten Donald Trump back in 2016? And was it older Democrats' fear of socialism, fear of change, that kept us from ever knowing if that was even possible? And directly leading into the chaos in politics that we currently exist in, since in large part we ended up with a second Trump presidency because we had a first Trump presidency. We had a first Trump presidency because Hillary Clinton did get the nomination and she lost in 2020 when they had the chance to nominate someone like Elizabeth Warren. No, too socialist. When they had the chance to elect someone like young Pete Buttigieg. No, he's too young and maybe too gay. No, they wanted geriatric Joe. They wanted the old guy that they knew and loved and felt that wouldn't rock the boat too much, who wouldn't try to change too many things, who would just keep things the status quo. Old voters elect old politicians to keep the status quo because that's what they want. They don't want things to change. And by not wanting things to change, they don't allow things to get better. We need new young blood in politics because that is how we progress as a nation. Young ideas don't spring from old minds. I say that more in a metaphorical sense, but also in a literal sense because these old politicians have literally old minds that are starting to not function as well as they used to back in the day. Cognitive decline is absolutely setting in, and those really shouldn't be the sort of people that we want leading this country into the future because they're not going to be alive to see it. It's hard to convince them to legislate and care about a world that they will not experience because they have at most 20 more years of life left. And the same could be said for the old voters that are voting these old politicians into office time after time as well. They want comfort and stability. They don't want to care about what's going to happen in 50 years because they're not going to be around in 50 years. Younger politicians are going to be more motivated to push for a better future and a better world because that's going to be the same future and the same world that they're going to be living in. But they can only do that if the old politicians vacate their seats to let them sit in them. The old folks do have to get out of the way, both the ones in office and the ones who are voting them into office. Let's not forget, this nation was founded by a bunch of guys in their 30s and early 40s, and even they could see a need for, in the future, a foundational document of our nation to be changed over time as the nation grew and changed. That's why we have amendments. They are meant to be amended as our nation and our culture evolved. So even from the start, our country wasn't meant to be led by a bunch of people in their late 60s and 70s, and it wasn't meant to stick to the old ways and the status quo. When it comes to our politicians, it should be out with the old and in with the new. I think as a nation, we would all be better for it. All right, guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another slice of news.